Okay. Hello, Endeavor here. So tonight I'm here with a guest with Gifts Ungiven. She's been on my channel before, and her and I also worked together on a project last year. She did the artwork for the short story, that kind of satirical, silly story that I wrote last year. She did the artwork for that. So I'm happy to have her back on the channel. How are you doing tonight, Gifts?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, no problem. What have you been working on lately? Some people probably know of your YouTube channel. You're kind of more of an artistic focused person in the scene, but what have you been focusing on lately?
Mostly just research in preparation for a few different projects I'm going to be working on. But yeah, I do plan on continuing my gifts project. I know a lot of people are kind of wondering what's going on with that, but it might kind of end up being something slightly different than it used to be. But in any case, I've just been kind of preparing for like the next stage of what I plan on doing.
Okay, and you were, I think, working on a podcast right now.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing a podcast in collaboration with Arctos. I'm not sure if your audience is aware of them. They're a publication. They produce, uh, they they basically take Evola or Nietzsche or maybe some of these more edgy writers, and uh, they translate them so that they're properly done without like censorship and stuff like that. It's actually really cool. They have other podcasts on their site through their publication, aside from the one that I'm going to be doing. But yeah, they're great. So I've decided to partner with them to do a podcast with regards to the topic of arts and culture. Maybe I'll be covering some political stuff, but generally speaking, it's mostly just going to revolve around culture.
Okay, good. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is the importance of myth and mythos. So when we say myth, people typically think of ancient Greece, they think of the Vikings, and it's not really something that people really that people really apply to the present day. But I think that it is a lot more relevant than many may realize, and I think it's really something that we need to think about on the dissident right, the pro-white, pro-European sphere, especially in terms of things like culture, because that's where this is the most important. So I guess I'll ask you what. How do you define myth, and what does it mean to you?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, yeah, so mythos or myth or even legend, and then tying that in with history, all kind of sort of get confused with one another. Obviously, mythos or myth is kind of more mystical, and people would even say that you know in modern times that that if something is a myth, that it's like a lie. It's kind of interesting how myth can be something good, but it can also be something that's kind of bad, right? Because oh, that's a myth. So it's actually quite confusing what exactly uh, is considered to be the definition of a myth. But in my opinion, I would say that aside from the bastardization of that word myth, I'd say that it means something that's more true than history in a way, because it's sort of the like. Let's see if I can explain this, because I'm trying to give you a definition that goes kind of counter to what maybe a typical definition of mythos would be. Um, History is it kind of centers in on like tiny little details, and so it will be sort of very scientific, a very scientific approach to understanding the past. But mythos is kind of a myth is sort of uh, a median. So it would be generally like all of these things, all of these tiny details wrapped together in the form of like an archetype or something like that, or many archetypes into a story. And you would think that there would be a falsity to that, but I actually think that that kind of takes out the little nuanced little details that don't matter, and actually makes a story that people can really understand. That's technically more simplistic, but really is talking about something extremely complex. So I hope that that makes sense. Is that a good answer? Do you like that answer? That's my
Yeah, I mean, what I would say maybe is that it might not be more real than history in a factual sense, but it has a bigger impact. It's more real in the
yes.
minds of people than it is uh, necessarily like in a factual sense. So, and to give you an example of what I mean by that, people I find don't really define they don't really understand the world through data points, statistics, through facts, and doing this like really deep, unbiased research into all various topics. Now, maybe there might be a few people that do, maybe even some guys in our sphere who, I guess the internet phrase for them is the hyper autistic type. Um,
Yes.
and I don't say that as an insult, by the way. But for the vast majority of people, they understand the world through narratives. They understand the world through the stories that they hear about it, and the stories that are told about it, and that pretty much creates the foundation for their view of the world. And uh, it kind of overrides all those facts because most people can never do like a large amount of research into history or into various of the controversial topics which people in this sphere regularly cover. They either don't have the time, don't have the ability, or really just don't have the interest in doing this really extensive research on it, and they really kind of understand it through narratives. I feel that I feel that that's really the power of myth. And
Definitely.
every and I find that like every civilization, every kind of society has its own it has its own mythos. It has its own stories about itself, which allows people through which the people who live in it understand the society they live in. So that's how I would say like myth is in many ways not more factually true than deep historical research, but it's more powerful than that.
Yeah, I guess you could say it's not necessarily more true. Um, though I would say that a myth might be more sturdy, though, and that makes it, hence making it more powerful, and in a way, sort of making it more true. But we can kind of get away from the true aspect of things. It just means that this thing is very robust, as opposed to a historical fact, which changes all the time. They'll say, "Oh, we thought we knew this about the Egyptians, but now we know this thing because we have
Uh-huh.
new archaeological evidence." Or just like any other scientific type of research, and I do think history is very scientific relative to the way we used to understand the past. That they can adjust things. They can decide that the data is slightly different, the numbers are different, the DNA was different. And that's why I say it's a little bit more, it's not as robust. It can sometimes not be as true because, look at something like climate change. That's a perfect example of where you would think that science could be very reliable. Well, time and time again, we find that you know, you have people who have a certain agenda who want to have the research come out a particular way. And so they'll pay to have research say, oh, yeah, there is, this particular thing, this particular outcome that suits
Mhm.
them, even if it might not actually be true. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, we'll definitely get into things like that. So, some of the work you've been doing recently is on ancient history. So, what have been a few of the things that you've been looking into recently, and how does it relate to this?
yeah. So I was actually doing a mythos competition, and I didn't end up entering it because the topic was so incredibly complex that I realized, okay, I don't feel I have enough information to say anything about this quite yet. And what I ended up researching most was ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Israel. But I kind of left the Grecian mythos alone, and a lot of I do understand like Nordic mythos, but most people go into those waters, and so I wanted to explore something a little bit more challenging, or maybe not more challenging, but just something more hidden that people usually don't cover. So, yeah, I studied. I guess you could call it the Near East.
Okay.
Is the region? Yeah.
Okay. So I think that the reason that mythos is so important is that in the present day, you, I mean, I don't think I need to remind people here of, what's wrong with the current system and what's really wrong with the zeitgeist, the intelligentsia, the ideology, the official ideology in the Western world. When you look back in history, earlier eras of European history, uh, the importance of myth was extremely important for was well, myth was extremely important for people throughout that history. And think of the examples of, like, in ancient Greece, they had Greek mythology, which everybody is aware of to some degree.
Yeah.
The Vikings had their own mythology, and this is usually what the images that are conjured in people's heads when they hear the word myth. But that did continue, and still does continue today. So, let's say in the Middle Ages, medieval times, the mythos of Europe was that of Christianity was a big part of it. They believed that Europe was a holy civilization. It was blessed by God, and that they were on a mission from God. And then you can even look at more modern times, like, let's say, the United States in the in the colonial years, and then even into I'd say throughout the 19th century, and even into the early 21st century, and this is, or sorry, the early 20th century, and this is true of Canada as well. The mythos of the settler, the mythos of the people who traveled across the ocean from Europe and settled North America, conquered this great land, and basically created this new extension of Western civilization on the North American continent. I mean, this was pretty much the myth which people in North America lived under up until, I'd say, the middle of the 20th century. But what's happened over the last couple of decades is that this new mythos, the foundation of the which is the foundation of the zeitgeist today. There's this new mythology, and everybody, I think, watching this will be aware of some of the bad actors who were involved in creating this. We're now living in somebody else's mythos. And the biggest problem that people of European descent have today is that the myth, the foundational myths of modern Western society is really a negation of us. It's a negation of Western culture as a whole. And the only way that we really fit into it is as the villains.
Mm.
And if you're in that position, you really don't, somebody who doesn't really have any kind of positive narratives about themselves, they really have no future. And that's why I find like this is such a pressing issue, because in order to communicate a lot of the issues which we discuss, we need to have these narratives in place for our people to even understand these things.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, definitely. So there's two things I have to say about that. So the reason why I decided to study ancient Mesopotamia is because it's very rudimentary to the mythos of Europe. Grecian mythos even has its roots in Mesopotamian uh, lore and myth, and so understanding that is important because there are so many things that, given our direction, our trajectory towards globalism, and all of the mythos that they are creating, that, like you said, makes us, out to be the villain. I really wanted to be able to understand what is it that is our root. And so I had to go really far back, and I found that time period explains the underpinnings of so many pieces of mythology. And so, uh, oh no, my battery on my computer is dying.
Oh, are you having trouble with your computer?
I'm having a tech issue.
Oh, okay.
Goodness, wait, hold that. Hold on. That's
Sure.
weird. I don't know why it's doing that because it's plugged in. Okay, if it dies, I'm really sorry. I'll deal with it in just a minute. Anyway, what I
Okay.
was saying
Yeah.
is that you have to have the root of our mythos. We have to regain an understanding of that, but also there's the mythos, the new mythos that you just brought up, which is all of the stuff that uh, they're using to make it seem as though, oh well, people who are from Africa are also took part in your ancestry, and they were also Vikings, and so on and so forth. So all of this needs to be considered. You need to consider the new mythos and the damage that's being done, but then you also have to get back to the root. And I think I've definitely done quite a bit of work there. That's really good. I'll be excited to share with people. But yeah.
So I don't actually know too much about that period of history. So what would be some examples of that? So like what, because I'll be honest, I'm not the foremost expert on ancient Mesopotamia. How would that so what looks like she's having a bit of technical difficulties. Okay. Okay. Yeah, she said her computer was kind of dying there, so hopefully she's able to reconnect. All right, I guess in the time being, I can answer any questions from the chat. So if anyone wants to ask anything that's related to this topic or anything adjacent to that. So yeah, I'll just see what's in the chat while we try to figure out the tech issue. I'm really sorry about that because I the stream had just kicked off and it started and we were just getting going. Okay. Yeah, so I mentioned this at the beginning, but that if you remember that kind of like satirical short story which I wrote last year, she actually did the artwork for it. So it's worth checking her channel out if you have to if you're into the more the artistic side of it. I guess I'll try to go on about what I was discussing about myth. Hopefully she's able to jump back in soon. So, well, what I was saying was that we're in this situation today where we're living in somebody else's mythos, and you can just see this in how history is taught. Because if you just look at one joke that I often tell people is that if you got your education, if you learned history from a public school in North America, you wouldn't know that anything in history happened other than slavery and certain alleged war crimes that took place during World War II. You just have to look at say something like Hollywood, because it's that's like something that's extremely influential on people's understanding. Like the story, Hollywood has become the modern the narrative industrial complex, as we call it, that in the media. How little of our history is even shown in Hollywood. Like, for example, one thing that was crossing my mind the other day was that I don't think I've ever seen a single movie about the American War for Independence. Now, I mean, I'm a Canadian, so it's not and actually some of my ancestors fought on the side of the British in that war. Not that I have any beefs with Americans of today over that, but the fact that like the founding historical event of the United States, that's something that's like not even covered at all in the it's something that's like there are no movies about that at all in Hollywood, even though all of this media is supposedly coming from the United States, and that really just tells you, it just really tells you that the people that are crafting these narratives do not identify with the United States as the founding identity of the country and the founding mythos, which I mentioned earlier, of the settlers coming over on the Mayflower and settling North America. There's the example that of Mel Gibson's The Patriot. I saw that movie about 10 years ago. I didn't like it, and for a few reasons, I kind of just found it really corny. Now I do like Mel Gibson. I know he's quite based, and he's done a lot of he's done a lot of great movies. But you even see a lot of like the post World War II myth shoehorned into the movie The Patriot. So, for example, they have they basically make the British out to be the Hollywood cartoonish, National Socialist Germans in the movie The Patriot. So like there's a scene where that the horrible, evil British officer shoves a bunch of people into a church and burns it down. I read that never actually happened historically, and it's something that is they put this in the movie because it conjures up images, and it doesn't really conjure up the images of the foundation of the United States, the American War for Independence. It conjures up the images of World War II. Or there's another thing. So Gifts has rejoined the stream. I'm just going to finish the thought that I was talking about, and before I'll pass it back over to her. I was just discussing the movie The Patriot, and because what I had said was that Hollywood is based in America, and I was saying, like, why are there no movies about the American War for Independence? There are none of them. Like I've only seen one in my entire life. That was The Patriot, which I was just discussing. And you see with this movie, The Patriot, they have this scene where the evil British officer shoves a bunch of townsfolk into a church and burns it down. And that's supposed to invoke images of it's supposed to invoke images of the German National Socialists in World War II. And then they also have this scene where like the lead character, he's like a fictionalized version of a guy who actually exists. They said that he had released all of his slaves because he didn't believe in slavery, and then they had this other thing that saying that if the slaves fought for them, then they'd be set free or something like that. And they had like the scene where the black guy says that he's fighting as a free man, and that and then the other guy says how great it is for him to be there. And even though this is supposed to be a movie about the mythos of America, the settler mythos of the Anglo-Saxon founding stock, you still see the post-World War II like egalitarian anti-racism shoehorned into this. So I think that's a good example, really, of just how like kind of the mythos of America in particular, but it's really the case for the entire Western world these days. Just how altered it has been that in the movie he can't just be like it can't just be that he's fighting for his own people. It has to be that he's fighting for some kind of universalist egalitarian worldview, which the founding fathers of the United States certainly didn't believe. And there wasn't really that great of a difference between the British and the Americans. So it was really just that the American settlers were more angry at the fact that they felt their rights as Englishmen were being violated, that they weren't being extended the same rights which which Englishmen in the United Kingdom were being afforded. But this movie tries to make the UK the British out to be like the cartoonish version of National Socialism, and it really just goes to show how the post-war myth has been just like all our entire morality has to be kind of grafted into that, and that's just a perfect example. Anyway, so Gifts has joined us again. Hopefully, the tech issues are behind us.
We won't have another one. That's never happened to me before. I guess my laptop, the wire that Supply's power just totally died. That's never happened before, so my apologies. But yeah, I just can't do video, but we're totally fine. Audio will work perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay,
anyway,
good.
um,
So, yeah, before you were talking about Mesopotamia and kind of its. Sorry that we kind of are jumping around a bit here.
oh no,
But yeah, so you were talking about Mesopotamia and how it influenced later eras. Now, I actually don't know too much about that history, so maybe it'd be interesting to hear, what you've been looking into with that.
yeah, sure. Yeah, so the reason why it's important is because a lot of the issues that we face today, the reasons why we, go to war, or we fight for certain countries in the Middle East, and we fight against certain other countries in the Middle East. A lot of those issues go back to you know ancient Mesopotamia, believe it or not. A lot of that mythos, a lot of the things that are sort of disputed from like ancient dynasties and whatnot, and wars that happened, and who was who and who got this birthright and so on and so forth. Those things weirdly actually are still affecting us today, and because of those disputes and the new mythology that are kind of crafted around what I would say would be falsities about the past, regarding like certain inheritances and all sorts of stuff. um, that time period is really key, because you have to understand that during Nietzsche talks about this quite a bit, and this was actually one of his uh, uh, things that he kind of explained was an issue during his time, and that was going to be an issue for Europe going forward, was uh, the issue of the mythos that we had in Europe surrounding Christianity. And so, I'm partial towards Christianity. I actually find it to be a good religion, and that's just my personal take on things. I do think that there are problems with it that Nietzsche pointed out that are significant. I think everyone can see, having to do with the institution of the church. But in any case, the important thing here is that a lot of the mythos that was created, that people were living by, he recognized as being, he called them true world theories. So, if I'm understanding this correctly, basically we have this idea that we're going to go to heaven, and that it's not in this world that we have that we accomplish things completely and truly. We reach our peak once we're judged in heaven. In any case, that mythos, you could see that in itself, and that's a complicated subject matter, has created all sorts of philosophical problems that people like Dostoevsky or Nietzsche had to contend with during their time. And whether they were right or wrong or whatever, that's something we can talk about. But they're definitely, just looking at that, Endeavor just brought up, American history and how that's been tampered with, and that leans towards egalitarianism, and they'll twist the mythos to match that. Well, we have other issues too, just like our religious foundations. All of these things, and this will be my last thing that I'm saying, tying that back to Mesopotamia. Oh, believe it or not, but even the egalitarianist stuff ties back to ancient Mesopotamia, or that region in general, because people who were ancient Aryans, they conducted their societies in a particular way, where they would have a hierarchical structure, and thus leading to dynasties like kings and queens and stuff like that. Well, all of that is based on mythos. All of that was tied to what would later become Christianity, which later gets knocked out with these revolutions that happen all over Europe, and communism and whatnot. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is that it really, like, our problems aren't just like tiny little philosophical issues. Those are kind of symptoms of like a really big problem that is very, very ancient, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned Christianity there, because there is this controversy that among the right. So a lot of people will say that. Now, I don't think this is the majority view, but I hear it now and then, especially on the internet. You hear this. You hear that they'll say, "Well, Christianity didn't come from us, therefore it
Mhm.
can't really be authentically European."
Yes.
Whereas something like ancient ancient Greek paganism or Nordic paganism was authentically from us. Now,
Mhm.
again, I have nothing. I thoroughly enjoy ancient Greek mythology, and I don't know too much about it, but I find Nordic paganism quite interesting as well. Not necessarily that I want to convert to to that as a religion,
Mhm.
but
Yes.
more that I just kind of think that the culture around it is pretty damn cool. But I would say this
Right.
though about Christianity is that even if it did come from at least originate from without, over the course, and then we'll even you'd be remiss not to talk about the other Abrahamic religions as well,
Right.
and one in particular. But over the course of a century and a half, I think that it's fair to say that that we made Christianity our own. So it became part of Western civilization in the same. Even if it might not have originated, even if it might not have originated there, it was something that we made our own in many ways. So because you even see that there are these influences of you see that there are these influences of Greek philosophy and of various pagan traditions in Christianity. Things like the Christmas tree, things like Yule, figures like Plato and Aristotle. These were all very influential on what developed into the religion of Christianity. So I think that it's something that we made it our own, and uh, I have a lot of problems with the church today, primarily because I really feel that they've really just kind of sold their souls to globalism.
Mm.
But I think though that for the history for the era, the long era, the millennium and a half, that was kind of our foundational myth, the cornerstone of Western society. I think it was healthy. I think it was healthy for the most part, and I don't really buy into the pagan critiques you sometimes hear on the
Mm.
internet of
Same.
Christianity, and I also really don't buy into the Nietzschean critiques. Now, admittedly, I don't know. I'm not super versed on Nietzsche. I have read Thus Spoke Zarathustra, but I don't really want to claim to be the foremost expert on Nietzsche's philosophy. But you often hear the claim that it's a slave morality, and I think that really doesn't. I mean, you can say that about maybe there's an argument to be made about the scripture, but I think to say that Europe was under a slave morality for 1,500 years, I think doesn't really bear much semblance to reality, because I mean, Europe basically conquered the world. Uh,
I agree.
From the 15th to the 19th century, Europe basically dominated the entire world, and I'd say probably 15th, 16th century was when Christianity might have been at its religious zeal might have been at its highest then. Maybe you can argue the Crusades, but I mean, even then, there's certainly not much slave morality going on during the Crusades on the part of
Right. That's what I was
Christian
going to
people.
bring up.
Yeah, so I'm someone that thinks that I have critiques of it in the present day. Now, I'm not nominally I am a Christian. I don't practice anymore, unfortunately. I don't want to get into my own religious life, but I would say that in a historical sense, it was something that was very healthy for our people. And well, like today, we don't have anything that has been able to fill that void. What has filled that void is kind of the cancerous the cancerous kind of cultural myth is the cancerous cultural consensus that we live under now, and there really hasn't been anything that stepped in since then.
Yeah. Okay. You said a lot there, a lot of really great stuff, and I found myself in that position, and still kind of do, confused about these various different topics you just brought up. When I would say about 4 to 5 years ago, especially around the time that Trump lost, the election, supposedly, I decided, okay, well, we've got other problems besides politics. I think art is important, but why is art important? And I realized over time that it's the stories that we tell through art. And you could say even sort of the metaphysics that the art, in the way that it's drawn or presented, whatever, or the music will communicate. Well, what I'm finding is that you have to have a religion. You have to have a mythos in order to really make art, in my opinion. But that's sort of a different subject matter. But in any case, I decided to go on this journey to really understand the past, because, when I was looking at the scene, the dissident right scene, I'm seeing multiple problems, which you just mentioned, which are, okay, if I'm going to be an artist, I'm going to speak for who it is that we are. Well, then who are we? And I ran into this issue of, we have these pagans and these Christians, and of course you always have atheists. But this is something I've really been working very hard on, trying to understand and piece together, particularly with regards to Christianity. And so something that you mentioned, which there's a lot of dispute about, is whether it's something that comes from us or if it comes from another group of people or several other groups of people. Like, who exactly does this originate from? And I don't think I'll get too much into the complexities of it, just because it's kind of a tender topic. But I will say what I have found looking at the mythology and the history, which is kind of funny because this is where you have a problem of mythos and history sort of being at odds, it seems, with one another, or that the history of ancient Israel didn't exist. I'm often told that there was no ancient Israel, which is absolutely preposterous. But if you take the time to understand that time period, which is one of the most clouded and mystery time periods that there is, you will find that the Bible is kind of split in half between two narratives, if you will, about who got the Abrahamic blessing. And so what you'll find is that there is history and there is a mythos that goes along with this ancient group of people, who would later split off into two different groups, one being, one group that we all know, and then the other one being, Christians. And so the Christians are inheritors of the Abrahamic blessing. That's an important component to understanding Christianity and that myth. That history is the Abrahamic blessing. Who got the Abrahamic blessing? In any case, to answer your question, with regards to if it does belong to us, personally, in my opinion, what I'm finding by looking at everything, thoroughly researching things, and I hope to have people on my show or come back on your show one day maybe, and we could talk about this in more depth. But what I have found is that we do have a connection to it. You can even look at our names, our surnames, our crests throughout Europe. There's even a crest for the tribe of Ephraim that you find up in England. There are so many things that tie European people to that region as well. And the last thing I'll say regarding that mythos or that history is that, take for instance, the Phoenicians. Okay, the Phoenicians are a group of people, one of many group of people mentioned in the Bible. And we are literally, we are the inheritors of their language. Actually, most, if not all languages stem from the Phoenician alphabet. Even the Grecian alphabet does. Ancient Hebrew, which is very different from modern Hebrew, by the way, was identical to Phoenician. And Europe, this is really key. Europe is actually Europa, which is a Phoenician princess. So I just want you guys to think about that. If anyone tells you that we are not, tied to the Levant, or, what is now present day Palestine and Israel, that couldn't be more wrong, because everything suggests mythologically, historically, I would even argue genetically, but we won't get into that right now, all tie, we are tied to that region as well. So, and the other important bit is that, the Phoenicians they're Semitic. It's a little bit confusing, but they are said to be also, they're denoted historically as a Semitic group of people. So make of that what you will. But anyway, one of the other things that you talked about, I don't know if you want to interject, Endeavor, but one of the other important things that you talked about was Nietzsche's critique of Christianity. And from what I've found looking at Nietzsche is that Nietzsche, he was tied to Richard Wagner. They were very close for a period before having a split for personal reasons. And both of them, from my understanding, thought that Christianity, maybe with regards to its roots, was a good thing. But then over time, what Christianity evolved into did kind of evolve into something that was quite constraining for European people. And there's all sorts of complicated reasons why that's the case. And I actually do think that might actually be true. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I agree with you that anyone who would say that Christianity was a bad thing for European people or for Europe, or that it was completely and entirely like slave morality, I definitely disagree with that. I mean, for the reasons that you mentioned, the Knights Templar, I mean, those people were like super aggressive. And this will be the last thing I'll say. That history alone, chivalry, and the Knights Templar and the Holy Grail, that's also another thing that ties us to the Levant region and explains a lot about our true connection to Christianity, not just that we're like controlled by some other group of people. But anyway, I'll leave it there. I've said quite a bit.
All right. Well, yeah, and something that I'm sure everybody watching this is totally aware of is, you mentioned the Levant region, and everybody thinks of, well, the people from the Levant who control a lot of who basically dominate the West today, and in many respects who hold a big sway of influence. If you contrast, because you said earlier that you wanted to make art about us, about people of European descent, but you had a hard time defining what the us was. I mean, you can look at it. Because we can define it in genetic terms. I think that's pretty easy in cultural terms as well. But the problem is that there isn't that binding myth. So we might be genetically the same, but then like culturally, we don't have that kind of a glue that's really like binding us together, which would have existed in the past. Maybe not quite on a broad scale, but I don't think that there's definitely been different people in Europe, different peoples of Europe, but nonetheless, today, people of European descent, be it in North America and increasingly so in Europe, are kind of losing the sense of peoplehood. But then if we contrast that with the group of people who we often identify as having a disproportionate influence on the West, and a notably negative one, they have a massive sense of peoplehood. They're probably the most ethnocentric people in the world. Like one thing I've noticed is that a joke I often tell my friends is that the easiest way to find out if somebody is part of that group or not is, it's not the last name, it's not the nose, it's not any of that. It's just when you meet them, within 5 minutes they'll have told you that they are part of that group.
Yeah.
and I don't know if I want to, like, I think with them, it's kind of, it goes to like a narcissistic level that it's just like, it's, the phrase I use is ethno-narcissism. I think it's kind of, they take it to a kind of a ridiculous degree, but nonetheless, they still, that gives them a massive amount of power. And I was talking about Hollywood earlier, about how little they're actually, even though Hollywood is based in America, how little of American history is even shown in Hollywood. Well, what is shown in Hollywood? Well, how many movies about World War II have we gotten? And then, in the decades after World War II, there was actually about the European armies fighting each other. And you very rarely hear about this you very rarely hear about Levantines during these World War II movies that came out in the 50s and 60s. But then 70s onwards, all of them, it's almost as if the actual war of World War II has been made into a footnote in the story of the suffering of this one particular group and the evil of the German National Socialists, which was really kind of projected onto just Western civilization as a whole. So, and then it's also worth pointing out that these are movies made in the United States. This history didn't take place in America. So, it just tells you a lot about the mythos and the conception of self that that the people running Hollywood really have. Now, I don't really want to talk about that the entire stream, but the point I want to make is that gives people power, and white people are in the process of being dispossessed today because we really do not, that kind of sense of peoplehood that we once had has been deliberately undermined. And I think that it's a question of how do we gain that back. Now, I do think that there is this problem that we have on the dissident right. And like I mentioned earlier, there's the paganism stuff and the Christianity stuff. And I think there's the big problem with this is you'll see these arguments on Twitter or on Telegram or something about, well, Christianity is bad because this, and paganism is bad because of that. And it feels like, it's putting the cart before the horse, because for what do they call hoplite for an ancient Greek hoplite, for a Viking warrior, for a Templar, for the hoplite, the Greek mythology, that was real for him. It wasn't something that he didn't think, that he didn't come to that conclusion because he wanted that to serve his political ambitions. That was real. The Norse mythology was real for the Vikings, and Christianity, the mythos of Christianity was real for the Templar. But the problem we have with this kind of it's very postmodern, I find. The problem you have with these kind of like internet arguments over Christianity, paganism stuff is that it feels like it's searching for it feels like it's searching for the correct religion, which is just going to back up a preconceived ideology. And that kind of really is disingenuous. So if I'm just selecting a religion based on it serving my political ends, do I really even believe in that religion? Good well point. I don't think you really can say that you can. You hold your political views sacred, and we can get into that later, but you hold these priors sacred. And if you just say, well, I'm Eastern Orthodox because the Pope is cringe, and Protestant churches have LGBT flags or something like that, well, now I'm Eastern Orthodox. Well, I mean, it doesn't feel like it's a genuine conversion to that. It doesn't feel like it actually has it doesn't actually function like mythos, like we've been discussing. It doesn't really function like that because it's something that's been arrived to in order to serve a prior. And I think the question is, we need to actually get something that people do genuinely believe in, that is real for us, and that that fits into the modern world. It can't just be like it can't just be something like, oh, we like this kind of era in the past, let's try transpose this onto the modern day. I think it has to be something that's more genuine than that.
Well, yeah, excellent point. That is something that I've noticed too. One of the things that'll tell you immediately if somebody's looking at things right with regards to these topics of religion and our mythology and so on and so forth is whether or not the person is able to actually talk about the metaphysics, right? Because that indicates a lot, because that's what ties into the authentic, I believe this thing. Well, why? Is it just superficial? Well, yeah, for most people, they're attaching themselves to paganism and they're almost atheistic. They don't actually believe in God. A lot of them I'm finding. Or if they do, they don't have the metaphysics in there. It's not they're doing it purely to be on some sort of team or to go against what they think for it to be politically expedient in some sort of way. So that's well said. I will add that if you want, what I found is that if you want to get the original thing, if you want, so paganism it's a misnomer. It basically meant that you were a non-Christian and you were sort of a degenerate. There's a lot of negative things that are associated to the word paganism, and so that mythos of Thor and all of that ancient Nordic stuff is really old. It's very, very old. And syncretism has happened over time, which is where basically two groups of people and two mythos and two religions kind of merge together to make a new. And that has happened many, many times over. And so my opinion is that there has been an evolution. And I think everything evolved through Christianity. And now, if you read Carl Jung, my understanding is that Carl Jung does think that we can evolve Christianity into something better. But in any case, lots of people want to throw it out. And it's because of that tie with that, rivaling tribe from, ancient Israel. And that we have issues with today. But it's not as simple as people think. You can't just say, okay, well, maybe that was a bad route, Christianity, or maybe we don't have any ties to that at all, and we're just being mind controlled or something, so we should throw Christianity out. Well, paganism isn't a very good, it isn't a very good foundation. And so if you wanted to get to the true, most real thing, something robust that would allow for a group of people to actually believe in this thing, as opposed to it just being aesthetic or being a political type of thing and very ideological, like you mentioned, is you'd have to understand what a religion really is and what is the source. And the source of most religions is, I'm going to screw up this term or this name. I think it's pronounced Manichaeism. It's basically, I think its origin is in ancient Persia, and practically all world religions stem from that religion. It's really interesting. There's a lot of connections to Manichaeism. But in any case, paganism would derive from those things too, or derive from that root as well. But aside from that, one thing that one learns by looking at mythos and looking at legend and history and all of this ancient stuff and religion is that you'll find that dynasties are also attached to religions. And then Jung also talks about, so that's bloodlines being attached to a particular religion, and they'll have a priestly class that are the ones who establish the metaphysics and whatnot, and do magic or whatever. But in any case, one of the things that Jung talks about with regards to mythos and religion is that, if I'm remembering correctly, he said that each group of people is going to have their own mythos, and that you can't just take China's mythos and their religion and apply it to yourself, because it's almost as if they have gone through a series of trials and tribulations that only their people have like the archetypes for. And so this is why when you're looking at paganism, it's sort of like the gutted version of what I think Christianity is. Christianity was a continuation dynastically. Like you can see the people who were, going very far back in time carried the scrolls with them. They carried the mythos. They became kings and queens of Europe, and they brought with them all the magi. And what I'm trying to say is that paganism is sort of that gutted version, in my opinion, of what something like Christianity is. Christianity has you take the word religios, and what you'll find is that the word really means to bind. So it has to do with like a group of people coming together under that banner. So when you're looking at religion and mythos, it's not really just like some random thing that any person can just be a part of. It's something that when you're talking about with regards to religion, it usually falls under like a particular ethnic group of people that has like a king and a queen. So like the Yellow Emperor in ancient China. That was a dynasty and a religion that came out of a particular bloodline. So I think that's an important component that people don't really realize when they're talking about this subject matter online, that is key and important to like the whole entire thing. So yeah, there's myth that, we've been talking about that's kind of like Hollywood myth, new myth, but then there's also this really important ancient mythos that ties to religion and has all of this important stuff that's very serious that one needs to consider when you decide, okay, what am I going to be? Well, you have all of these issues to contend with.
So I think that the important thing here is establishing continuity. I don't want to keep going back to this topic because it's something that it's been done to death. But if we mention a certain group that has influence in the West today, who we think of as hostile to us, they have this continuity in their story of themselves. Like a great example I can think of is Eric Weinstein. You know who he is, right? He does he does these podcasts, kind of like centrist kind of stuff. And one thing he'll always say is like, he'll say that he's against identity politics and that young white men shouldn't see themselves as a group, and that, that's going to lead to who coming back. But then he posts this picture on social media of himself giving the middle finger to a statue of a monument from ancient Rome.
Yes,
because he still feels like he's bereaved from something that happened 2,000 years ago. So he still feels like that he has been wronged by something that happened 2,000 years ago. Now, and you definitely see that with the whole World War II kind of narrative. And again, I don't know if I don't really want to go to. I wouldn't really want to go to the extreme where you're just being this complete narcissist. Like I feel like someone like Eric Weinstein is being in this regard. But establishing some kind of continuity, I think, is really what needs to happen, because you can't go back to the past. You can't go back to being Norse pagans. You can't go back to being medieval Christians. But what you can do, and it even goes back to what you were saying. So I don't know too much about the history of Mesopotamia or stuff like that. But what I think you can do is establish some kind of continuity, an idea that, well, we are the continuation of this which came before. So we are the result of that, and reestablishing that is I think the way that we can kind of incorporate these this history into kind of this newer mythos. There was something I wanted to say. Oh, yes, it was that, when you think of the way that history is taught these days, if basically like the history in Europe, like one thing that some guys in the UK have said is that the way that history is taught, history might as well have started in 1939. It's just like there was
Right.
no history before that. In America, well, okay, it started with slavery. Like it's like slavery was when history started. Other than that, like there's really nothing else that you really hear about. And like the other thing to point out is the way that we talked about that one group. The other thing is that like you see today that in the United States, but now increasingly and incredibly in Europe too, it feels like Africans are being put like at the center of all of our history. So there was that crazy, what was it called, 1619 project. They said that like America was established when the first African slaves arrived in the continent. And even more ridiculous is because that's ridiculous enough. I mean, the other thing I thought of recently is that like people that when you talk to somebody, I'm not American, but I'm from Canada, so pretty close. But when you talk to people who are not Americans about America and you try to get into American history, they really don't know anything about it other than slavery. Other than that white people in America were, at least according to this kind of like cartoonish one-sided version of history, that they were just rotten to black people. But other than that, there's very little that you hear about American history that other people will even know about American history. I mean, increasingly so. It's like that in America too. And you even see that with something like the American Civil War, that's been transferred into again, blacks have been put at the center of the American Civil War. Now, sure, slavery and they had that was part of it, but then the entire all the other people that fought in the war, all the other issues there, all the other the people's identity with their states, and like the conflict between North and South, and states' rights, and then people like Robert E. Lee or Ulysses Grant, all that's just being written out. It's just more of the history of how white people were rotten to black people, really.
Right.
And this like we've been severed from any kind of continuity in any kind of continuity, and kind of this the current understanding of ourselves is that basically, like I said at the very beginning, we're basically just the villains in someone else's story about us. And I think that it's kind of reestablishing that continuity is really how I think we should approach. We should really approach that history, and insofar as building a new mythos. It's by because you can't like go back, like let's say, let's go back to being let's go back to when before Vatican II or whatever it is. It's about reestablishing that we are the result of that entire history. I think that's how you can do that.
Yeah, well, and even take someone like and that was really well said. Take someone like Charlemagne. People that are pagans wouldn't like this, but the genetics prove that every single person in Europe is related to Charlemagne, right? So everyone in Europe has a tie to Christianity in a very significant way. It's not like you just had Norse pagan people and they were living all alone on their own, and then we disrupted them and their genetics didn't mix with Christians, and they didn't take part in that willingly. Obviously there were problems, but yeah, this fighting that people are doing in the dissident right with regards to such an important topic, and then you just have just the most ridiculous ideas of what people think of something like Christianity, and they don't even give it a chance to really understand it in a historical or understand the mythos properly. I'm sorry, but like you are tied to that, whether you like it or not. You're related to Charlemagne. We all are. So you have to understand that is a part of our history, and we have to treat it with respect. And we do have to move forward, and it does have to kind of turn into something else. Because, like you said, we can't just simply go back to Vatican II. Because honestly, my opinion, I'm a little bit of a heretic. I do think that there were problems with the Catholic Church. I do think that there were things. Yeah. So obviously, we have to figure out, well, what is the story of our people as a whole? It's not you're a pagan and I'm a Christian and we hate each other. Obviously, we have to be discerning and decide what it is we want to do and what we don't want to do. But I think we're kind of jumping the gun. And that's what I found. I don't have all of the answers, but what I found is that people have been very, very quick to say, well, I'm just going to be a pagan and I worship Odin. Well, why? You know, is it really all that simple? No. From my understanding, from what I've looked into, and I've done a lot of research, it is very complicated. This is serious stuff. It's not as simple as, oh, that person was a part of that tribe and we're part of this tribe and we're actually all just Nordic. You know, we're all just pagans. It's not that simple at all.
Yeah, and so I think that also even like the experience of the present day is kind of shaping this kind of new identity. Now it's out of like a rather malicious attack against people of European descent across the world, but even through that, there is something developing. Like an example I can give is that back in May, I attended Frodi's conference in Tallinn, Estonia, and the crowd that attended, it was first thing I will say about it is that I was really impressed with everyone that was there. It was really top notch people. It wasn't just a bunch of internet weirdos. It was well established people of various age ranges, a lot of young people and people who were well put together. But one thing I thought of quite a bit when I was there was that people were from all over the place. So there were many Canadians, which I was really happy about. I even wrote a blog post about how there seemed to be so many Canadians in our sphere of politics in the dissident right. But then you got people from there are people from Denmark, people from the UK, from America, from and a couple other countries around Europe. But everyone was brought there. Everyone was brought together because I think that there was an understanding that we kind of all face the same existential threat together. Now, I don't want to diminish the importance of national differences. I really like national differences. I do like that there are different groups of European people. Sometimes Americans in particular, but then Canadians as well, sometimes we're accused of being these like uncultured, ignorant Americans who just don't understand the finer points of and look, I can laugh at that. I'm fine with like poking fun, and that's all good. But I do have a lot of respect for the various differences in nationalities, and I'm not saying I want that to go away. I do want that to continue because I like that somewhere like Estonia is this unique country where they have this really unique language and just like a really tiny country, but it has this history of its own and really unique place. But I think that what's really emerging is that people of European descent are kind of becoming. I'm not going to say one people because those differences still do exist. I mean, a lot of us don't even speak the same languages, but they're being made close. They're being brought closer together because, frankly, we're under attack as a group like that. We're being attacked for being white, like the people who are trying to dump people from sub-Saharan Africa into Europe. They don't care if these people, if they're being sent to Slovakia or Slovenia, that just doesn't matter to them. They just want the European genetics to be erased, really. And that's kind of why that's really kind of why I feel that the dissident right has kind of this broad appeal to pretty much anyone, which is why I think that insofar as forming a new mythos, we have that continuity. We have that maybe I'm a Canadian, My ancestors were from Scotland. They don't know if any of them were from ancient Greece. It seems like very unlikely, but I still feel like I have a part of ancient Greece in me. I feel like that there is that part that I can feel like I am part of that continuity. But I think that also like that insofar as forming a new mythos, you and I had talked earlier about things like the Holodomor. Like that's something that nobody ever hears about. It's an event of history that and if they do hear about it, it's never seen as being as important as the Germans' war crimes during World War II, or alleged whatever. That's never seen as being as important. But I also think that there's this other thing that people will say is that we shouldn't be victims. Like we don't want to make ourselves out to be victims. And I get that to a degree. I get that, you don't want to, because we are living in this kind of, in this culture where making yourself out to be the biggest victim is what makes you the most virtuous. And I really think that it is a toxic kind of culture. So what I would say is that, the way that we can understand the present era and let's say the latter half of the 20th century and the decades leading up to what's gotten us into the position we're in now. I think the best way to understand it is not so much as like I'm like the eternal victim and everything. It's more of like I really see this as I see it more of as a betrayal and as deception, right? That we're really lied to more. I feel like that's kind of what that's going to be how we in the future understand this era, that it was an era of mass deception. It was an era of corruption. It was an era where enemies from without and traitors from within got their hands on power and caused disasters for us. And I think that like through that is what we can actually kind of create this new mythos, which can really galvanize people into a more healthy identity.
Yeah. That's well said. Yes, in order to create a new mythos, from my understanding, is that what happens is you take the old mythos, you take the old understanding of the past, and then you synthesize it with what has currently happened or what has just recently happened. And that is the job of the mythologist to do that. And of course, there are archetypes that are timeless that you can use to tell those stories, but you always have to tell the story of the suffering of your people, because no one's going to do that for you. So yes, that does have to be it has to be fused into the mythos that we have as our foundation. So we have to figure out what our foundation actually is, because it's being broken down and we're being lied to about what it is. And then we have to put in the new information so that we can have this new mythos. Yeah, because you can't simply just go back and say, well, I'm just an Odinist. Well, that doesn't work, because that was a different story for a different time. New things have happened. And yeah, the Holodomor, a lot of the wars that were little battles that were key and important during the world wars, where people were brave and stood up for what was right, their stories have never been told. And so it's up to the artists to tell that story, the mythologists, the writers, to tell that story properly. And that just hasn't been done yet. So if this is an amazing thing about art, the art world, is that when you're in the contemporary art world, or even if you're a musician or any type of artist, really, you kind of feel like there's nothing to talk about anymore. Like a white person feels as though, oh, well, we don't have anything else to say. No, there is a lot to say, because people will look at like African Americans and they'll say, oh, well, they have so much suffering and so much that's happened along their path that they have so much to rap about or whatever, or a movie to be made. We have the same thing. There are so many struggles along the way that we need to talk about and mythologize. And the reason why that's important is it's not because we are victims. It's so that you understand who you're fighting against, what you stand for. These are trials and tribulations that our people have gone through, and through these struggles and through these triumphs, you always have a commemoration painting. We used to have battle paintings. Why did we have battle paintings? Because people just wanted to look at like a battle scene because it looked cool? No, we had a battle scene as a commemoration for that event where people died, and that actually meant something. You know, when people die on your behalf for you, it's not just some silly political thing like, oh, well, I don't want to appear to be a victim. No, that group of people died so that you could be here today. They're your ancestors. You have to remember their sacrifice. That's very, very key. The other thing that you mentioned that was really interesting, see if I can remember, I wrote down a note. It's with regards to the breaking down of our mythos and our culture and our identity. I would say that there's two different mythos that are kind of developing. There could be our organic mythos, which is rooted and based off of, you know, who we truly are. And obviously, I'm going to take part as an artist in creating that mythos and lifting that up, of course. But the other one, I would say, is very inorganic, and is being manufactured like a product, and that would be globalism, like the globalist sort of. You'll see like a Fred Meyer's commercial, and it'll show like these characters of flat design. Or
I was thinking of the exact
thing.
same thing when you mentioned that. I was thinking of the exact same thing.
Yes, and so you'll see, and this is where the art, you know, merging into metaphysics almost, or it tells you something about the world that you're living in. Like, are you in a postmodernist, scientific, you know, high-tech world with, like, you know, people of every color smiling, or are we going to have something that's real and detailed and, like, you know, ties back to like something authentic and real? We have to decide to actually be the authors of our story. Otherwise, we are going to be characters of flat design. Most people will be that, which is basically a slave. A slave doesn't have an identity.
You know, that characters of flat artwork, it is just repulsive. And, you know, if not only is it not artistically, not only is there no artistic skill that goes into it, but, you know, there's just something so deeply wrong with it. And I've always known that. And, you know, I feel that, you know, what it represents is, it represents globalism, but it's an artwork that is, first of all, probably not made by artists, but probably made by PR firms and
Yes.
NGOs and all these like government bureaucracies who are trying to figure out how they're gonna, you know, how they're gonna further advance their project. But it's an artwork that is designed to for people who don't have a shared experience. I was talking with American Krogan a few weeks ago about this. That one thing he said was that, like, in globalism, like the shared experience no longer exists, and that's just a disaster because, you know, something like people of flat, well, it's something that's meant to reflect one of these major metropolitan cities like New York, London, Toronto, Paris,
Yes.
where there is no majority ethnic group anymore. It's just people from all over the world, and really the only thing that they really live for is just kind of this materialistic nihilism, consumerism. And the people of flat, like it's like the reflection of that soullessness. It's like the reflection of like the disconnect from any kind of shared any kind of shared experience at all. So you know, when you contrast that with some of these advertisements from like, one of my favorite examples are the posters they used to have in Canada in the late 19th, early 20th century about about settling the West. Well, it was always this like blonde-haired, square-jawed guy with a with one of those like scythes that you cut wheat with, and then like he has like his wife and his kids there, and it's saying like journey out west, settle the land, or something like that. And that's something that reflects like a shared understanding, a shared identity, and really a shared consciousness. Whereas the people of Flat, it's appealing to something that where that all that is completely, it's all that's completely absent. And in terms of like how we understand how we got here, you see these memes that are posted, and now I know they're kind of cringe. Like you get these trad art Twitter accounts. Like I know they're a bit over the top for me. They're a bit sappy, but they do still have this. They do still seem to resonate with people. As long as you don't like overdose on that kind of stuff. But one thing that they'll often show is like they'll just show architecture from today versus architecture from a century ago. And like, even the most liberal of people who I know will agree that they'll even say to me, I'll even get them to say like, well, why is it that we don't have good architecture anymore? It's not like it's impossible to build it. It's not like it's not like we don't have the technological capability of building something that's beautiful. We can easily do it, but why is it that they choose to build something that's ugly instead? And when they contrast that, and going back to what I was saying about like the lack of continuity and of the narrative that the current era we're living in is one of betrayal. You contrast the architecture, something like architecture, but there are many other examples you could choose. Anything aesthetic, but it goes beyond that as well. You contrast something from the architecture from a century ago versus the architecture of today, and there's this sense that something great has been lost. And again, we're not saying like you're going to be able to recreate a past era, but it's the idea that we went astray due to this era of mass deception, due to this deception and this betrayal. We went astray, and that it's our goal, and perhaps even it's our destiny to find our way back to the path of righteousness.
Yeah, definitely. The thing to keep in mind is that every single group of people that comes to the United States at some point in time is going to be merged into this weird homogenized new group of people that is very inorganic, that are basically crafted by the globalists, the people in power. And it's like this slave class that doesn't have an identity, and you can see it in the artwork. So, if you do have any African American, Chinese, anybody who isn't white who's listening to this cast right now, just know that you're also getting your identity of like your tribe that made you very beautiful. That's actually, you're getting erased as well eventually. It's because it's globalization. They want everybody under one banner so that they can be at the top. They can have an identity and a tie to the past that has an inheritance that ties to an ancient religion. But then the rest of us, we get homogenized into this new group of characters of flat design. And you can see, I mean, it's modernism, postmodernism. It's these buildings that have no designs. Well, why do we have buildings like that? Why don't we make buildings like those classical buildings anymore? Well, it's because we don't have those roots anymore. They're stripping those roots. One thing to keep in mind is, why would a group of people invest a lot of money to make the Sistine Chapel ceiling and paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling over the course of, I think it was maybe 7 years that it took for Michelangelo to paint the ceiling alone? These structures that we used to make, the reason why we made them is because we knew who we were. we knew who we were, but also it was really key, and it's very important that we weren't individualists. So the characters of Flat Design, the buildings that we have now, they're low cost. There's no identity. There's no high quality effort put into any of our structures or our art. Well, the reason why is because everyone is the same. Everyone is an individual. There's no past. The people who made these great structures and pieces of artwork and sculptures and whatnot in our past, they knew that they were making what they were making for a particular group of people. This is really key because no one's going to spend an enormous amount of time. Some of these structures, people would die before they got to see, them and completed. So why would somebody take it upon themselves to build an abbey that maybe in their lifetime they'd never even see this thing constructed? Well, it's because they know they come from a lineage. They come from a group of people, and they want to honor that group of people for the people who are going to come after them so that they can see this thing. So that's one of the other reasons why everything is becoming so ugly and simplistic and cheap, is because no one wants to invest in creating some beautiful, gorgeous castle that they're never going to see. Why? Because everyone's an individualist. Everyone is not a part of some larger group. They're just an individual with no identity. Why would they want to make anything that extends beyond their existence? They have no lineage. They have no past. So I think that aside from money is also another factor. I think that with regards to the architecture issue that you brought up and the art issue, I think it's because we don't have a collective identity anymore that's strong and robust. And so nobody wants to invest in something that perceivably has nothing to do with them as an individual.
Yeah. Probably one of the, I remember around, I think it was late 2016 or so, late 2015, rather. It was in 2015, rather, when, the first time when I started to think about these things, and it was kind of subconscious, but I remember the way that I thought a lot about the terrorist attacks that the terrorist attacks that took place in France in late 2015, and then the New Year's Eve sexual assaults that took place in Cologne, Germany, on New Year's 2016. I feel like these things are going to become, these events are going to become part of a broader, European consciousness going forward, because the first thing that struck me with these was, well, that we had just been subjected to months earlier this kind of all this guilt propaganda about letting refugees into fleeing from Syria, even though a lot of them weren't even from Syria. And then they say, oh, there's this war here, so you guys just got to let millions of people into your borders. I was kind of like in the process of I hate saying it because it's like a cringe term now, but in the process of getting red pilled, but just to use that for lack of a better phrase. But the thing I distinctly remember from this time period was that when this terrorist attack happened, so I was a university student in Canada at the time. I remember that the blame very quickly went from, and not just in Europe, but in Canada, which we were all the way across the Atlantic Ocean from. Obviously, this thing made huge amounts of headlines. But what really struck me was the way that how quickly the blame went from, this was this horrible terrorist attack to, don't you dare say anything bad about Muslims, or else you're a horrible person. And how quickly it went from being that there was this horrific terrorist attack to being you. And now I understand what they mean is you as a white person are a terrible person if you object to any of this, and if this terrorist attack changes your mind about letting all these refugees into Europe or North America, well, then you're a terrible person. That's when I really, that was the first thing that struck me. But then, the other one was when there was the Cologne attack the Cologne sexual assaults in Germany and the New Year's Eve 2016. The thing that I just thought was that it's when I really started to realize that, like, white people worldwide, like, we're in a lot of trouble because this is something that was like entirely caused by the system. It's not just this. Like, let's say, for example, like like, I don't know, black crime in the South or something like that. Like, that's something that that it dates back a long time. Now, that also is part of anarcho tyranny, but like the fact that this had been like something that was imported, and that all the institutions immediately sided with the foreigners against the locals, in this case in Germany. But then you saw the same thing kind of spreading to other countries where the message reached Canada, that if you dare have any questions about diversity or Islam or immigration because of this, well, then you're the bad person. And that really was when I really started to think that, like, we're in some trouble here. And I do think that these kind of events going forward are really going to become part of a new mythos for kind of the era that we're in, because you do have to, like you said, remember the suffering of your people. But then also, I don't want to, I don't feel like I'm a aggrieved victim as much as I feel like I'm angry that we've been betrayed in this way. And that's not even to mention something like Rotherham, which I didn't even know about at the time. That story had broken in 2014, but in Canada, it was never once reported in the news. As of 2016, I had no idea that had even occurred. But I think that various moments like this will kind of be emblematic of this kind of era of betrayal, that we'll both remember the problems that were caused when groups who were incompatible with us were let into our lands in big numbers, but then also the betrayal of our own elites, be it hostile outsiders, or white elites who sided against their own people. I think that that's kind of going to be a major theme going forward, and I think that's kind of be part of this kind of new mythos going forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And the other thing to keep in mind is that causing all of those issues which you just mentioned are the things that people had seen in movies. People had seen these things mythologized about these groups of people coming into our lands being just like us, or that you could have Christians and Muslims living side by side with one another, and that wouldn't be a problem. This all comes from people didn't vote for that straight away. Like, it's an emotional appeal. They first watched a movie, and then in the movie they were emotionally appealed to, and then they go and they vote. And of course, it's not at all what people are expecting it to be. It's like the complete opposite, because we're all very different. We all have very different ways of conducting ourselves. But yeah, one of the issues with I think you're definitely correct. Again, we have to take all of these things that we've experienced that are awful. We have to mythologize them. We have to understand them and process them. But there is an interesting problem in art that you always come up against when you're talking to somebody who's pretty well versed in the philosophy of art. And it's the concept of kitsch. And I will tell you that kitsch is something that's very dangerous. Roger Scruton talks about kitsch quite a lot. And it's basically, it's kind of like we're at this point where it's sort of like meta irony, where someone like Jeff Koons, he does these big blow up dolls as like he basically does kitsch, ridiculous art that is kitsch, and he doesn't get in trouble for kitsch because he's doing kitsch, right? So it's like a meta irony type of thing. Well, the reason why that has happened is because it's symptomatic of something very serious. So basically what happened in the art world, and you could even say to a degree in cinema too, like any art form really, is that, a person who is white or of European descent is not allowed to have any sense of when they're trying to create a piece of artwork or a story or whatever. it always has to be disparaging. Like, it can be serious if another group of people was harmed by us, but if we do it, if we have like a sentimental feeling towards something, if we felt bad about something that had happened in the past, so on and so forth, and we want to take, an emotional approach to or inject emotion into a very difficult time in our existence, like the events you just talked about, someone would say that that's kitsch. Someone would say that that's there's sort of like like it's not serious. Like, when we want to make something that's actually serious or sentimental, we're not allowed to do that because we have this word called kitsch. It's actually quite a big problem. But in any case, we basically just have to understand that that's ridiculous. It's very psychologically manipulative, because all other groups of people are allowed to engage in kitsch or in seriousness of some form, and they're able to create a mythos or whatever it might be. But yeah, we have to understand that we need to be a little bit more serious about ourselves. Not everything is a joke. Not everybody is, not everything is ironic. But yeah, you'll see that in art. You'll see that in like media with regards to white people. It's usually very jokey and silly, and you can't be serious.
Yeah. Oh, that's definitely something I've noticed as well. I mean, like the various like things that you're meant to okay, like what's an example? Okay, like an example I thought of is that like and sometimes you'll see in shows that when a white character dies, like it's not like considered a big deal, or like, well, he just gets shot and he's dead or something like that. But then like when there's like a black character that gets killed, like then like this is like this big deal. It's like the show and admittedly I actually really like the show, but I rewatched it and I did kind of notice this. That was that do you know the show Boardwalk Empire? Do you know this show?
I've heard of it, but I've never watched it.
No, admittedly, I really liked it, but there are a couple of like subversive themes in it. It takes place during the 1920s, but I really like. One thing I noticed in like the first season was that they had this like subplot that like so there was this one black gang. Well, at least they got that part right. But anyway, but like one of their guys was killed. One of the guys in the gang was killed, but then. And then, like it was seen as like this was like this big outrage, like, oh my God, this 20-year-old guy kid was killed. Who did this? We must find who's responsible. We want our revenge. But then there's like dozens of white characters that just get killed, and then it's like there's no gravity to it. Like, it's not seen as like anything that's that important. And I did really think about that because, like, they build that up as being like. Well, they build it up as like it's a crime against all of them, but then something that's done to a white person is not a crime against
anyone.
Not a crime against all. Yeah, it's not a crime against anyone. In fact, like I mentioned with things like the response of things like the Paris attacks or things like that. Eventually, the bigger crime becomes noticing this or attributing it to the people who actually committed this crime. A lot of times, like actually drawing any kind of conclusions based on that is considered a bigger crime than actually committing the crime to begin with.
Because we've been mythologized. We've been in these stories depicted as, the people with the whip, the people who are shooting the gun at the helpless, like, slave or minority or whatever. And so it couldn't, in like a normie's mind, there's no possible way that somebody with darker skin could actually be the perpetrator. That's like been completely and entirely instilled in our collective unconscious, is that if you look like us, especially if you look like you, if you're a white male, you're 100% the villain.
Yeah. So, but yeah, like, I think that like part of it is, I think part of like, it is actually like understanding that various things, both the minor things, both, so that being like just crime and criminality, and then the major things like mass immigration, things like anti-white indoctrination or LGBT insanity and things like this. This stuff is an attack not only against us as individuals, but against us as a people. I think that that's kind of the I think that's the way that we need to get people to understand this, because it's really hard to communicate a lot of the things that we talk about, because, like you mentioned, our sense of group, our sense of like in group has been deconstructed, and it's about like kind of rebuilding that so people actually see these things as not only a crime against them as an individual, but them as a wider group. So, we're almost, I think we can finish soon, but I wanted to ask, how do you think this era, let's assume that, eventually we get out of this and we reach a much more healthy understanding of self and a much more healthy system for us to live under. How do you think this era will be remembered? What will the impact of, let's say, the second half of the 20th century and the first couple decades of the 21st century, how will this era be mythologized for a more healthy group of European people in the future?
Good question. I think, well, it's obviously going to be a very dark time.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no question. But I do feel optimistic, and I think if we can revitalize our roots and really find out who we really are, I think we'll look back at this time as us having won and triumphed over this really horrible predicament that we found ourselves in. I do think that it is kind of interesting if you're looking at this optimistically and you're not just being blackpilled about it. You mentioned before that, we are being stripped of our identity, that everything is kind of, it's being broken down, and most certainly is. But I actually like to look at it as sort of a cleansing. If you do look at our history, you will see that we have always been very disjointed. Europeans have been fighting each other for a really long time. I actually do think that this is kind of an interesting time period, because we've sort of been washed away of all of our complexities. And now we can dive back in and try to understand, okay, well, who is it that we really are? Do we have a common source? Are we all related to each other? Do we all sort of believe, generally speaking, the same sort of things? So I actually think that, if we do things right and we stay optimistic, I do think it's very possible that we'll look back at this time as, a time of struggle, but of a time of figuring out and realizing who we were. That's the way that I like to think about it.
When I got into this, I always, like I mentioned earlier, one of the things I don't like about some of these like trad art Twitter accounts and stuff is that, like, I don't want to be somebody who always pines for the past. Like, I love our history, but when I got into it, I kind of felt like, we were robbed. We were robbed of our culture. We were robbed of our future and everything like that. And, it made me really like nostalgic for, what would have been. But I really kind of have changed in that I feel like what I really pine for now is kind of a rebirth, a new era where we can not really change what's happened, but move on from it, like kind of find something new and build something new out of the chaos that, unfortunately, I think is going to only get worse in the coming years. But I'm just really interested in this kind of concept of rebirth and, like, finding a new, not really changing the past, but accepting what's happened and then finding a new way forward to something better in the future. Anyway,
I think so. That's a good way to look at it.
I think that we will probably finish soon. What work do you have coming up that people should keep an eye out for?
Well, I actually just wanted to say one more thing.
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to let anybody know that's listening that, there will be debates as to who it is that we really are and what our origin is, or what paganism is, or what it's not, or what Christianity was, or who controls Christianity, so on and so forth. But I just wanted to say that I don't know the answers. I I'm obviously very well studied in it. I've taken a lot of time to understand the problem, but it's very complicated stuff. And I'm down to have a conversation with anybody who wants to about this complex topic. But it's by no means what I'm trying to say. It is by no means as simple as saying I'm just a Catholic or I'm just a pagan. So I wanted to put that out there. But yeah, with regards to my work, your question was, what do I have? What was your question again?
Yeah. What do you have coming up that people can look forward to?
So yeah, I have my podcast where I'm collaborating with Arctos. They're a publication. I talked about them earlier. So that'll be coming out on the 1st or the 2nd of September, so next month. And I do actually have another project which I'm working on, which is an artistic project, which will be a merger of visuals and music. And I'm hoping that I can bring some of my mythological understanding or historical understanding of the past and make something a little bit more serious than what I usually do with my channel with that project. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be happening hopefully in spring. You'll start to see that develop. But in any case, yeah, that's what I've got going on right now.
All right. Well, that sounds great because, I do feel that it's the artistic sphere that we're really lacking in. So it's always encouraging to hear people talk about certain artistic projects that they have ongoing, because I think that's really what we need more of.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that's good for tonight. So thanks for coming on, Gifts, and I will talk to you all later. Good night.
Good night.